All right, so for this lecture, just going to look at more on water usage and really what's been going on underground and how we've been abusing water. So one of the things is something called the Ogallala Aquifer, and that's located in the United States. And since the center of our country is the prime hotspot for farming, a lot of the water has been heavily subsidized, and farms for years and years and years have been overdrawing water out of the ground, and the Ogallala Aquifer has been greatly depleted in a lot of areas. If we kind of look at this picture down here, like 75% in some areas. The greatest areas are up in the northern parts of that aquifer, but a lot of farming has been done down in these areas. So we can see the depletion kind of happening in certain areas. I'm going to link a couple of the videos, especially this TED Talk on running out of water. I think it's really good. So please make sure you click on that in Canvas to take a look at. When we look at the Colorado River, I know you guys read the case study on it. So this is kind of a review. But we've been constantly drawing water out of the Colorado River, and the areas way downstream, closer to where it runs into the Pacific, have actually gone dry. And there's another video called Chasing Water. It's a little long. It's a documentary about a man who traveled to Colorado to see how it's really dwindled in size. That's not mandatory to watch, but it's a pretty good watch of how a guy filmed his documentary moving down the river. The government, as I said in previous lessons, the government is responsible for setting up a lot of these dams and reservoirs through subsidies. So they allowed areas to build these dams for very, very cheap. And it was really done so it can stop the water and have a surplus of water for farmers and ranchers, for growing crops and for cattle. So if we can create these huge, huge lakes or pools of water for them to constantly have a supply, they wouldn't have to worry about drought as much. And that's the reason why these were made so much. It's also good news that they're kind of being destroyed, which is on the next slide after this one. One of our most known ones, Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, that's been produced. They, in those regions, rely on it heavily for electricity and water. And if we look here, this is Lake Mead. Now, it's hard to fathom that was never there prior to the building of the Hoover Dam somewhere in the 1930s, or that's when it started. But if you look at the lower right caption, you can see that this was the river that kind of ran through that area. Wasn't very big, and through the damming of that river, obviously you're going to start to have a backup of water, so it is encompassed this entire area. So it is taking over that landscape and ecosystems. Now you might say, well, it's mostly rock in those areas. You still have animals that live there or that could be living there, and other areas that have dams. You have to think about that as to how it takes over ecosystems. As I was saying, dams are on the way out, which is great. In previous years, they've constantly been destroyed, and I'll link a website that kind of shows through the years how they've been destroyed. And I'll link these two videos as well. You should watch one of those two videos to see how the dams are being blown up and what they have to say about the area. So it's really, really good news that dams are being taken out, because these dams do stop sediments from going downstream. They stop the migration patterns of fish species. They have huge implications in the local ecosystems. Lastly, transferring water over land. We set up these things called aqueducts, and that's this big row of water, ribbon of water, I should say, and areas where it's very, very dry, but they need a lot of water transported to them. You obviously can't do it with trucks. You could do it with pipelines, but pipes can only be so big, so they design these concrete river systems, if you want to call it that, and they transfer the water from one area to another, such as parts of California. It works in moving water, but you can see that it's open to the air, so you have evaporation that's happening. You also have fragmentation that's happening in certain areas, and it still runs the risk of there being a drought and not as much water moving to an area, because it's dependent on wherever that water is coming from. Okay, so it does help with bringing water to an area, but the downside is that you're drawing water from another area that should have it and also you're going to be having evaporation of the water as it's being transported. Okay. Next lesson, we'll look at desalination real quickly, and then we'll talk about ways to conserve our water. Please make sure you watch the videos that I linked. They are important to kind of understand what's going on with our water systems, especially underground with the aquifers and also the destruction of these dams.